everyone. Welcome and welcome back to week 2 of Cultural Governance in the Modern Middle East. In this week's lecture, we're going to look at ceremonies and festivals as codified competitions. And so this means that fairs and expositions and cultural events were used as implicit ways that countries could assert their power and sort of say, look at us, look how developed and sponsored our cultural programming is, look at this rich history we have. It was another way that states could compete internationally with each other. So we're going to look specifically at ceremonies and festivals during the Hamidian period, which is the reign of Ottoman Sultan Abdulhamid II. We will look at some examples from the capital of the Ottoman Empire, which was Constantinople, as well as the periphery, so what was going on outside of the capital. And our main question for this week is, what was the goal of heritage management during this period? There are a lot of different answers. A lot of possible answers to this question. I would encourage you to post about it in the Google Classroom and discuss with each other what you think some of these motivations were. And I will explore some in this lecture. So one main goal, which we mentioned a little bit last week, was that material culture was invoked to demonstrate wealth and power. So like I just said, look at our cultural wealth. We are a long-standing culture and civilization. This was particularly important for the Ottoman Empire. And Ottoman culture was promoted to reinforce their political power and political influence over all the territories. This photo is from a photo album which was sent in 1894 to the US, Britain, and France from the Sublime Porte, which was the administrative capital in Constantinople. And Sultan Abdulhamid wanted to send these photo albums out, which included photos of the Imperial Palace, Yıldız Palace, which is what's on screen now, but also photos of architecture, people, yachts, mansions, archaeology, animals. All of these photos were carefully curated to reflect a really specific identity, what the Ottoman Empire wanted to be known for. And then these photo albums were sent to the other great powers, US, Britain, and France, to promote knowledge of Ottoman culture in the West. These two photos were also in the albums, and they're a really interesting little case study, one thing to focus on. In 1892, the Sublime Porte opened the Imperial Tribal School in Constantinople with the goal of educating sons of tribal sheikhs in the Arab provinces. So there would be these powerful Arab tribal leaders in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, other Arab countries of the periphery, and they would send their sons to Constantinople to be educated in the Ottoman way of life and culture. So they would be taught an Ottoman curriculum, which was very heavy on Ottoman history, the Turkish language, and skills that would enable these children to become successful in Ottoman bureaucracy. So finance, writing, things like this. And it's a really interesting case study because the Ottoman Empire was trying at this point to really reinforce their authority in the periphery, and sponsoring education in general is a good way usually of doing this because it shows that you're investing in the future generations. But they also had sort of an explicit purpose, because they were very open about it, that they wanted to change the culture in the periphery by training the new generation in Ottoman manners and Ottoman education. So both of these photos were in those photo albums that I mentioned on the previous slide, and it kind of shows a before and after for the Imperial Tribal School. On the left, we see two Arab students in their normal dress, and on the right, the students have been transformed into Ottoman youth with their outfit of sort of Ottoman military outfit and fez. The sponsorship of heritage and culture, as I mentioned, is used to assert political authority. And one of the places that was sponsored and patronized heavily by the Sublime Porte was Jerusalem, because as I think most people know, there have been many claims to Jerusalem over the years. And during the period, like during the Ottoman period, great powers of Europe would sort of be the guardians of various non-Muslim communities in the Ottoman Empire. So, for example, if you are a Catholic in Jerusalem and you have a problem, you would write a petition to the French government. You wouldn't write it typically to the Sublime Porte. And so one of the ways that the Ottoman Empire tried to attract non-Muslim communities was through sponsoring the preservation of culture and the renovation of buildings in Jerusalem. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which obviously is the Christian holy site. And so the use of symbolism through patronage and promotion of culture and heritage actually increased as political power waned. And this isn't unique to the Ottoman Empire. As we will talk about next week when we get into antiquities and excavations, Britain did this as well. As the British Empire began to decline, archaeological expeditions and the acquisition of antiquities really rose. The British Museum, of course, is a little famous for this. They acquired the Parthenon marbles and a lot of material from Iraq, specifically Greece, the Ottoman Empire, from the 19th century through the 20th century, as the British Empire itself was declining through the period of decolonization and independence of various states. And so the British Museum was able to symbolically reflect connections and authority over regions that the country no longer had political power over. The practice of gift giving as well was used internationally as a way of asserting influence over other communities. Many of these gifts were in the form of patronage of heritage sites and religious buildings, which is something that we will also talk about more next week. So I'll spend most of the rest of our lecture talking about this event, the 1893 World's Fair, which was held in Chicago to celebrate the 400-year anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in North America. I won't say discovery of North America because I think we all recognize at this point that Europe at the time was aware of North America, several expeditions before Columbus found it. And of course, there's already pre-existing culture and civilization in North America. But regardless, Christopher Columbus's personal discovery of North America was kind of a landmark moment in Europe-North American relations. And so the 400-year anniversary was monumental, and the US decided to throw a massive World's Fair, which provided an opportunity for states to compete with each other through works of science, art, and culture. Each nation had its own pavilion, and like any fair, you can go around to the different pavilions and try food, see traditional costumes and artwork, meet celebrities, and they would also hold concerts, plays, and other demonstrations of things unique to that country. So the Ottoman Empire felt pressure, um, not just at the fair, but in general, in the form of what's called the Orientalizing gaze. Some of you might be familiar with the notion of Orientalism, which is the study, it is literally the study of the Orient, which is anything east of Europe. And it's often a diminutive notion that Europe and North America express some sort of imperial pressure based largely on civilizational discourse, that Europe and North America are more civilized than the Middle East or Asia. And so Oriental culture is generally like a form of entertainment rather than the culture of a contemporaneous civilization. So the Ottoman Empire felt pressure because they knew that whatever identity they put out in the world could be used against them in a negative way, like, oh, look at this silly culture, it does this instead of what we do. So Sultan Abdulhamid was very closely involved in the design of the Ottoman Pavilion, and they decided to have a horse riding demonstration because Arab horsemanship was very well known around the world. And so they had about a dozen men from Iraq and Syria mostly take part in this horse riding demonstration to show off their skills. And it was really exciting, obviously, for the visitors to see these men racing around on horses. But Abdulhamid made it clear that he wanted only, and I quote, this is actually what he said, handsome Arab men of stature to do the demonstration. So he wanted really nice looking men who were tall and who could conduct themselves with sort of professionalism and wouldn't just be running around causing chaos, which is a stereotype of the Arab provinces, that they're not as civilized even as Constantinople. And so every element of this demonstration was very closely curated. How the performers looked, what they would do, who they would speak to. It was very carefully controlled to promote exactly what the exact identity that Abdulhamid and the Sublime Porte wanted Europe and North America to have of Constantinople. So let's just rewind a little bit and look at the Ottoman Office of Ceremonies when we're wondering where this concern over Ottoman culture and the presentation of Ottoman culture to Europe and North America, where it comes from. So the Ottoman Office of Ceremonies was founded in the 16th century under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, also known as Suleiman the Lawgiver. He expanded the territory of the Ottoman Empire greatly. If you remember the map that I put in the lecture from last week, he really extended the boundaries much further than they had before and was credited with a really impressive act of rulership and administration, managing such different territories all under one empire. And so he founded the Office of Ceremonies to be familiar with palace rules, oversee celebrations, and plan the visits of foreign ambassadors. The office also had other functions, like organizing the giving and receiving of presents. The office really was in charge of all protocol decisions. For example, Friday prayers were sort of a spectacle, and the Office of Ceremonies would determine when the Sultan can leave, who follows him, who stands next to him at certain dinners, for example, who may sit next to him and in what position, very specific. The visits of foreign ambassadors is a really interesting dimension of this responsibility. because foreign ambassadors would arrive to the palace first if they were going to visit the Sultan, and they would be led through 3 courtyards. In the second courtyard, they would need to dismount their horse and continue on foot. This is very strict. Even very high-ranking bureaucrats of the Ottoman Empire, everyone had to dismount their horse and continue on foot. The ambassadors were held very tightly by palace guards because, well, there was an incident under the reign of Sultan Murad where a Serbian captive got loose and stabbed the Sultan. And so they introduced into protocol that the ambassadors are not able to be free moving during this time. They would offer the Sultan presents, and the Sultan would give the ambassador a very fancy, luxurious robe that the ambassador would need to wear for the remainder of the visit. They would put the ambassador's visit presents on display while they ate. They would not eat with knives, and they would not have alcohol, of course. All of these protocols were under the authority of the Office of Ceremonies. And in the 19th century, the tasks of this office were kind of broken into 2, and the visits of foreign ambassadors and other occasions, state dinners and things that involve other countries, this protocol office was moved under the Office of Foreign Affairs. And so it was very important both abroad, as we saw in the case of the Chicago World Fair, and at home in the capital. Protocol was very important, and it was done to reflect a specific identity of Ottomanness, which really began during Sultan Suleiman, that we are well organized, civilized, and a site of high culture. Just one more little thing to add. Another responsibility of the office was to change the pillows and blankets and jewels that adorned the throne, depending on the status of the ambassador that was coming to visit. All very interesting stuff. So that's it for this week's lecture. I hope that you found it interesting. As always, feel free to email me or post in the Google Classroom if you have any questions or thoughts about the material from this week. Next week, we will talk about archaeology and imperial power and how the collection of antiquities reflected power and identity. So we have this article by Billy Melman. I hope you enjoy that as well. It's very interesting. That's it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.